In this tutorial we'll have a look at the media browser part of Mistika, which is where we arrange and manage all our media that we're going to work with. By default, the media browser will appear on the right hand screen of a dual GUI setup. To access it, if it isn't already there, just double clicking anywhere on the timeline on a blank area will bring it up, or pressing the media tab here. On single screen Mistikas, the media browser is accessible here and then can be maximized with this button here. So I've created a brand new project that I've done nothing with at the moment, just to have a look at the directory structure that Mistika creates. When we create a new project, Mistika locates the work directory, which is defined in the mconfig Mistika configurator. In that directory, it creates a directory named the same as the project, and then under there this set of standard folders that we can add to as we like. Mistika storage is completely open, so if you went to this path using the standard operating system Windows, you'd find exactly this setup. So let's quickly start by importing some material just to see how it behaves in the media browser. So I'm just going to import some red files. In fact, these red files are in quite a complex folder structure, but I don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to click the parent folder, and just before I hit import all movies, I'll just check my setup. I'm going to say that I want my clips to be referenced by the file name of the red file, and in fact I don't want to replicate that complicated tree. I'll just have them all in one folder. So I'll just import those movies. So now if we go back to the media browser, we can see that under data a folder has been created, and in that are all our red files. And as we click on any one, we can see them on the source monitor here. So the first thing to note is the extension on these. Notice it's .lnk, which stands for link. There are multiple different file types that you'll find in the media browser, a link being one of them. We'll have a look at some of the others, but have a look at the manual for a full description of all the file types that you'll find in the media browser, and detailed instructions on all the functions in fact. So a link file is a method that allows me to reference my media directly, but also allows me to be able to move these references around in my project without having to change the folder where the original media is held. So for example, in here I might choose to create another directory. Let's call it some shots. So I now have a directory here, and I might choose that some of these shots, for whatever reason, I would like to take them out, Control X, and put them in this directory, Control V, just purely for housekeeping reasons. And the point is that because these are link files and not actually the source media, I can happily move these around without affecting where the source material is. Which means that I can manage my project in the way that I want to manage it without necessarily upsetting other people who could also be looking at that material from other systems. So you can see that we can create directories of our own naming in order to manage our material and move assets between folders. Note that this interface doesn't support drag and drop, so just Control X and Control V, usual cut and paste functions as appear. To get our shots onto the timeline, we can either just double click them, and wherever our cursor is, that's where the shot will appear, or we can multiply select shots and click open, and that will have brought all those shots up onto the timeline. We can of course save timelines, so I'll hit Control S, and you can see that our normal directory structure has appeared. So I'll call this my timeline, save, and we can see that in the media browser my timelines appeared as a .env file, an environment file, fancy term for a timeline. And we can save any number of these. So if I wanted different versions of my timeline, Control A for save as, my other timeline, save. So now within our media browser we have this timeline and this timeline. Let's just clear that up a little bit. Notice the different colors of the various assets that we'll find in the media browser. You can see the links are a bluey green, the environments are blue. There are several different types of file that we'll find in here. So in fact, let's have a look at a couple of others. What I'll do here is I'm just going to make this shot a little shorter. And I'm just very quickly, for demonstration purposes, just going to quickly put a title over it. We'll cover all this in another section. And I'm going to render this shot. So I'm going to output it just to generate a few different file types. So I'm going to call this my render. Okay, so on rendering, we can see that Mistika's created us a piece of media, a new rendered clip from the processes that we gave it. We'll have a tutorial in the future about how we work with effects and rendering. We'll just use this to look at the file types that it's creating. So go back to the Media Manager, and we can see that under the render folder, so under Data, let's close these down so we can see what we're doing. So under Data, we have a render folder, and you'll notice there's a new folder called My Render, which is the name that I gave it. And inside there are two files, a green one and a purple one. The green one ends in .clp as a clip file, and the purple one ends in .rnd as a render file. The difference is, the clip file, just like the link files, is a piece of metadata that refers to the final media that we created. So double-clicking it, we can see that we get our rendered piece of media on the timeline ready to work with. On the other hand, the purple one is the metadata of everything that made that clip. So if I double-click this, I'll get what's called a group, which we'll look at another time. A group is a container, effectively. So to ungroup, just edit, ungroup, and you can see that within there was everything that made this clip. So the .rnd files are very useful because they're very small bits of metadata that describe how we created a file. And in fact, it'll remember everything right down to every single paint stroke you make to create a clip. All of these files, by the way, are saved in plain text, so they can be manipulated externally if you want to, in order to, for example, automate functions and help with integration. You'll notice another file has appeared here, a .auto file. That's actually an automated backup that Mistika creates because I'm working in my other timeline at the moment. Every few minutes, however it's set up in mconfig, it'll save itself as a backup, and that can be loaded just like any other timeline. Another thing you might find here from time to time is something that says crash.env. If you're unfortunate enough to suffer a software crash, Mistika has a background program that monitors Mistika and anticipates its crashing. And when it senses that a crash is imminent, it'll save an environment called crash.env. So the chances are, if you've suffered a crash, just go back, load the environment called crash.env, and you should, fingers crossed, be right up to date. The media browser allows us various ways of looking at our content. So, for example, if I go back to my list of red files here, of course we can reorganize in whichever way suits us, from start codes, end codes, etc. The buttons here will allow us to move along the columns to see other pieces of metadata we might have about the files that we're working with. We can also show the data in different ways. I've got details up at the moment, or just as names, or as icons if we want to see something more visual, which makes more sense if we're looking at clip bins. Go back to details. We can also access data from anywhere in the system. For example, the home button here, the home in this context isn't the home directory of the system. It just refers to getting you back to your current project. But we can happily go and find data from any other project. If I press my up button, you can see I'm now into a list of projects. So I could, if I wanted to, go and find another project and go into its data maybe it's render, for example, and find something else, another piece of media that I want to use in this project. So now I have this, which in fact is being dragged from another project. Then the media browser, I can just simply jump back to my home position. We can also use the media browser to create subclips using the source monitor here. So for example, I can click one of these link files or clip files, and I can find a particular point in the shot. Mark in, mark out, and now here I can use the save from source monitor function, which will create a yellow clip, which is Mistika subclip. So here, if I were to select this onto the timeline, what I've now done is pre-selected that part of the shot. I can also use the source monitor and media browser to save groups of shots as well. For example, going back to this shot with a title, if I select it and go Control C for copy, it actually appears in the source monitor. So the source monitor will show you whatever you have selected in the media browser, or alternatively whatever you have in your copy buffer if you're working on the timeline. So having got it into the source monitor, I could now click the create group and give it a name, and now you'll see in the output folder .grp, which is a group, which I can now use to bring back up onto the timeline as a predefined selection of items. If I ever need to send a group of things to a different Mistika, that's what the package group is about. There are certain items within Mistika where just sending the environment, the .env file, won't be enough, and in fact a title plugin is one of those cases, because there's other external data that make the title work. So by creating a group and then pressing package group, Mistika will automatically create a compressed file that contains all the data that's necessary to make an effect work. So it's a handy way of wrapping up an effect to send to a different Mistika system and make sure that all the metadata is attached. So this was generally an overview of the media browser functions of Mistika. The written manual is actually a better place to find detail on all the instructions and all the different file types that are likely to be found, and also the different default folders that appear. But hopefully this has given you enough information to see how the browser works with the timeline.